not anywhere near Mount Rushmore.
I brought a picture for you.
There they are, Albert. Faces of stone.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. Having recently completed a proper rewatch of Twin Peaks Season 3 for the first time since 2017, today I wanted to focus my attention on Mr. C. A friendly warning to all, there will be spoilers in this video on all things Twin Peaks, so viewers beware.
Ray and Dario, have you got them back there somewhere?
I'll get him.
Darius said something about you being worried about tomorrow or the day after.
I'm supposed to get pulled back into what they call the Black Lodge. But I'm not going back there. I've got a plan for that one. No, I'm not worried, Ray. About anything.
Well, that's good.
Anybody ever show this to you before? For a while, day after tomorrow, I'll need to be on my own. That might be a good time for you to learn how to mind your own business. This is what I want. Want. Not need. Philip, why didn't you want to talk about Judy? It's that I don't need anything. I want. And I want that information. This is Philip Jeffries, right?
Why don't you ask Judy yourself?
Who is Judy?
You are going back in tomorrow, and I will be with Bob again.
Who is this? Who is Judy?
You've already met Judy.
This is what I want. What year is this? This is what I want.
From the beginning, it was clear that Mr. C had two primary objectives. Number one, defeating his doppelganger, and number two, finding Judy. Mr. C went to great lengths to achieve that first objective, so let's quickly review. For starters, we know that as far back as 1997, Mr. C created a tulpa version of himself to maintain the balance when he was supposed to go back to the Black Lodge. Dougie Jones was manufactured for exactly that purpose, and this enabled Mr. C to remain in the world, and it worked, with Cooper ultimately switching places with Dougie instead of Mr. C. There were also several assassination plots put into motion. The first was when Duncan Todd passed the responsibility on to Lorraine, and the incompetent hitmen she placed on the job failed miserably. First, when neither of them saw Cooper driving away with Jade, and then again, when a totally new crew of unaffiliated lowlives tried to steal the car and set off the explosive trap. Next, Ike the Spike was called upon, and he first slaughtered Lorraine along with everyone else in the office, but Ike also failed in his bid to take out Cooper, and he too failed miserably. And finally, Hutch and Chantel, they did a number on Mr. Todd, but they also ultimately failed at getting Coop, and they never even got an honest crack at it because they agitated and were subsequently taken out by an angry accountant. We also had an awful lot of stuff going wrong for Cooper that may or may not have had some influence from Mr. C. For starters, the Arms doppelganger banished Cooper to the realm of non-existence. And it's not clear if the Doppelarm was working on behalf of Mr. C here, but I think that's a strong possibility. We also know that Mr. C had some affiliation with the mysterious glass box in New York. It's difficult to say what Mr. C's objective was regarding the box. Was he trying to trap Cooper? Was he trying to lure Judy? Or was this Mr. C's version of two birds with one stone? Whatever the case may be, the box succeeded in temporarily securing both Cooper and Judy, and just moments apart as well. The moment that Cooper found himself inside the mysterious glass box, was the exact moment when Sam was searching for the missing security guard as Tracy was doing her delicate dance of seduction. Somehow or another, Cooper was released out of or expelled from the glass box. And at this point in time, I tend to believe that this was the moment when the fireman gave Cooper the mysterious clues about 4:30, Richard and Linda, and 2 birds with 1 stone. But regardless of whether that's correct, Cooper is somehow taken out of the box just moments before Judy arrives and proceeds to slaughter poor Sam and Tracy. Cooper continues his journey into the realm of non-existence. He winds up in the purple room with the eyeless woman, and Cooper approaches the outlet with the number 15 on it. Cooper was instinctively drawn to this outlet, but the eyeless woman leads him away, pulls a switch, and she's off and away. When Cooper returns, we have a number 3 on a different outlet, and now there's a different woman there who looks an awful lot like Ronette Pulaski. She warns Cooper to hurry, her mother's coming, and Cooper gets sucked into this outlet and switches places with Dougie Jones. Note that Cooper wasn't instinctively drawn to this outlet the same way he was the former, and I think that's important as Cooper usually has pretty good instincts. We know that Mike later informs Cooper that he was tricked and that one of them must die now. But when was Cooper tricked, and by whom? Was he tricked when he was banished by the Doppelarm? Was he tricked when the eyeless woman led him away from that first outlet? Or was he tricked by the other woman? And was the trickster, whoever it was, working on behalf of Mr. C? Were they all in on the trick? It's difficult to say, but since his trip to non-existence led him into the glass box, I'm inclined to believe that at the very least, the Arms doppelganger was giving Mr. C an assist here. And I'm also very suspicious of the eyeless woman who later became a version of Diane. There's definitely good reason to be suspicious of any and all versions of Diane, especially that version who appeared to her own self after her and Cooper crossed over. And since Diane's tulpa acted as a pawn to Mr. C for most of the season, I think Cooper may have ultimately been tricked twice by Diane. First, when she prevented Cooper from entering that first outlet, and then again when Cooper was checking into the motel. But back to the glass box, one thing that struck me this time around is right around the time Sam and Tracy were getting slaughtered, we see Sarah Palmer watching a Violent Nature program, and her expression indicates maybe there's something a little more going on here. And for this reason, I believe the fireman was probably the one who yanked Cooper out of the glass box just before this, because if that's what happened there, then the line, "It's in our house now," that makes perfect sense, as this would also be happening as Sarah was watching her program as Sam and Tracy were being devoured. And since the box captured both Cooper and Judy, I'm liking the 2 birds with 1 stone take from Mr. C's perspective here. At the very least, the glass box seemed to have successfully integrated Judy into the world, but I think Mr. C was ideally hoping to achieve both of his main objectives with the glass box. It didn't play out that way, I believe because of the giant. When Mr. C first finds Ray and Daria, it was when Beulah and Lotus had them in hiding. It's important to remember that Mr. C infiltrated the place, and that any aid he received from Ray and Daria, that was coerced. The same situation is implied with Duncan Todd. Only Hutch and Chantel seem to have any genuine affection for Mr. C, but even that isn't entirely clear. Mr. C needs Ray to find the coordinates, and this entire ordeal was all connected with Ruth Davenport, Bill Hastings, and Major Briggs himself, and Hastings' secretary was the one who had the information that Mr. C wanted.
Kind of funny that she'll only give it to you.
This information seems pretty important to you.
I think it's also important to remember that someone hired Ray and Daria to assassinate Mr. C to the sum of $500,000. But Mr. C expertly uncovered their plot, and he killed Jack, the guy who bugged the car, and he killed Daria because he knew she betrayed him and she had never gotten the information he wanted from Ray. And then there's also the fact that Mr. C was speaking with someone he believed to be Philip Jeffries. But this individual wanted Mr. C to go back to the Black Lodge so that he, this mystery person, could be with Bob again. That leads me to believe that this certainly wasn't Philip Jeffries. And I'm inclined to think that this may have possibly been Mike, or perhaps more accurately, Philip Gerard. The point here being, there were forces working against Mr. C, and at no point are there any clear hints regarding who this mystery nemesis might be. The reference to being with Bob again suggests Mike as the frontrunner, although Ray later believes he's speaking with a man named Philip, presumably Jeffries. But Mike was the one who was actively trying to help Cooper, so it seems reasonable that he would also be trying to destroy Mr. C. Mr. C is willing to do anything he can to achieve his objectives, and to overcome any would-be obstacles and setbacks. And Mr. C doesn't care at all about anyone who might get in his way. And with the aid of Bob, Mr. C is able to defy death itself with the help of the woodsmen who were sympathetic to Bob's cause. So Mr. C cheated death when Ray tricked him. Ray was supposed to kill him and place the ring on his finger, and I can only assume that Mike was the one who provided Ray with the ring, which I guess means Mike may have been the one who placed the bounty on Mr. C's head to begin with. I'm not sure if this is necessarily correct, but if it is, then that brings up a lot of interesting questions about the goals of Mike as opposed to the firemen, where they always seem to have slightly different objectives on the whole. Similar, but different. Meanwhile, all of this time Mr. C is plotting and scheming, poor Cooper is stuck in a state where his childlike innocence is on full display. And this is apparent in almost everything he does, whether he's being guided around like a confused toddler, or whether he's getting dressed, enjoying a tasty meal, forgetting to close the car door behind him, his fascination with badges and statues of lawmen, his willingness to share chips and play games with Sonny Jim, his happy and playful demeanor inside an elevator, and of course, his ridiculous love for coffee. This living in the moment with a childlike appreciation for the simpler things, these are all elements directly derived from our beloved Special Agent Cooper. They were always there, except now in their purest base form. This is the plight of our beloved FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, as his shadow self plots and schemes with cold and calculated measures. By the time Cooper finally snaps back to reality with his full memory intact, Mr. C has already used his own son as bait for a trap, and he finally reached the coordinates, which happened to be near Jack Rabbit's palace. Visually, we see that the coordinates should have led him to the Palmer house, where his desire for some type of union with Judy would have been possible. But the fireman intervenes here, and he overrides the coordinates by instead transporting Mr. C to the Twin Peaks Sheriff's Station. It was here that the Giant's trap was set into motion. Lucy recognized the imposter and she gunned down Mr. C. Before Bob could summon the woodsman for another successful resurrection, Coop busts onto the scene, Hulk Hand Freddy is present, and Bob is apparently destroyed. At least I think we can assume Bob was destroyed, because when Cooper wakes up, the first thing he does is settle matters with Bob. But later when he comes out of the lodge after having altered the past, he isn't concerned with Bob in the least. Instead, he's focused on crossing over, finding Laura, and bringing her home. I assume the fireman wanted Bob destroyed, seeing as he was the one who put the pieces into motion with Hulk Hand Freddy and his destiny. But I don't think Mike, or should I say Philip Gerard, I don't think he wanted Bob destroyed. I believe he gave Ray the ring in hopes that Ray would send Cooper's doppelganger back, but that almost certainly didn't involve destroying Bob. Those pesky woodsmen foiled his plans. But I maintain that Mike, or rather the other Philip, was the one Mr. C was chatting with when he thought it was Philip Jeffries. Regarding the woodsman, there seem to be several varieties of woodsmen. We first see a woodsman in a cell with Bill Hastings. and I assume that this particular woodsman may have influenced the events when Hastings had a dreamlike memory of being in Ruth's apartment, that this was the setup of Ruth's severed head alongside the headless body of Major Briggs. We next see a woodsman when Lieutenant Knox discovers that Briggs's body was finally found, headless and the wrong age. Then we see the healer variety of woodsmen who were twice summoned by Bob after Mr. C was shot. Note that these woodsmen had no direct interest in attacking those who harmed Mr. C. They were merely there to heal, and after Lucy shot Mr. C, it was Bob himself who took the initiative to go on the attack. The woodsmen who first surfaced in 1945 after the atomic blast, they seemed like worker woodsmen who set up their mysterious interdimensional convenience store base known as the Dutchman's. Then we had the violent woodsmen of 1956, and we know that they were brutal with an inclination towards murder, where their actions appear to have aided the Frogmoth mission. We also had a woodsman creeping around the zone, killing Bill Hastings, and Cole saw a vision of a bunch of dirty bearded men. And finally, we have the woodsman who led Mr. C to Jeffries. By late in the story, both versions of Cooper ultimately want to find Judy, and they both visit Philip Jeffries for guidance to that end. When Mr. C visits Jeffries, Jeffries neither admits nor denies that he put a hit on Mr. C. They both reflect on the moment when Jeffries appeared saying he didn't want to talk about Judy, and Jeffries gives Mr. C a list of numbers. And Jeffries informs Mr. C that he already knows Judy. It's difficult to say which set of numbers Mr. C received from Jeffries. Were they the false coordinates where Richard triggered the trap, or was it the Jackrabbit Palace coordinates, which were ultimately another trap involving the Giants' meddling ways? Either way, I get the impression Jeffries knew he was dealing with the doppelganger. When the good Dale visits Jeffries, he's accompanied by Mike and/or the other Philip. Jeffries shows Cooper a different clue for finding Judy, even though Cooper never directly asked anything about Judy when he got there. So while Jeffries seems a bit aloof, it definitely feels like he recognizes and favors the good Coop over Mr. C, particularly with the cryptic message that Cole would remember the unofficial version. At this point, Mike is the one who sends Cooper back to the past, on the night that Laura Palmer was about to be murdered. My thinking here is that Mike is hoping Cooper changes the past because that would change the fate of Bob, whom I'm convinced Mike had further business with in some capacity or another. Regardless, we know that Cooper didn't go to find Judy after he saw Jeffries. He instead went to seemingly save Laura by changing the past. But that was just step one. He then tries to take her home, but Laura is sucked away before Cooper completes step two. My feeling has always been that when Cooper placed the ring on his doppelganger's finger, that the two Coops were reunited. The good side, symbolized by the childlike innocence we saw in Dougie Coop, and the cold and calculating intellectual demeanor of Mr. C on the other side. Remember that these were both parts of the same Cooper. This was visually illustrated in the Cool Picture Show the fireman revealed to Andy. And because of this, I think it's reasonable to conclude that the childlike innocence of Dougie Coop, his friendly good nature, combined with the curiosity of his surroundings, and the ability to enjoy and cherish some of the simpler things in life, I think it was this childlike innocence that always defined Cooper and usually kept his darker traits in check. It's also important to remember here that Cooper was a textbook case of white knight syndrome. He cherished life, and he took an oath to uphold a certain code. But when push came to shove, Cooper would dismiss the rules if it meant saving someone. And we saw this when he broke the law to try and save Audrey Horne, with a little help from Hawk and Harry along the way. Step one was saving Laura, but Laura's predicament is no better off after being saved. When Cooper finds her, there's a dead body on her couch, and the corpse has an orb-shaped something protruding from his belly area that looks an awful lot like the Bob orb, and Carrie Page seems to be in all sorts of trouble, where she's in way over her head. exactly the same as Laura before her. So Cooper saving her certainly didn't seem to improve her lot in life, and Cooper isn't even the least bit concerned about the dead body on the couch or the suspicious ramblings of Carrie Page. Cooper still just wants to proceed to step 2 and bring her home. It was never about saving Laura, and we have strong evidence, again, that this is at the Palmer residence where Sarah is acting as some sort of host to Judy. It's now that Cooper is finally utilizing the information from Jeffries. It's not entirely clear what Mr. C hoped to achieve when he found Judy, but I personally believe it's strongly implied that such a union would effectively result in Mr. C becoming immortal and all-powerful, godlike. It's also unclear why Cooper wanted to bring Laura to Judy, but it seems like he's trying to sacrifice Laura for the greater good per the fireman's instructions. In both cases, Mr. C and Agent Cooper, the end game involved Judy.
I'm not gonna talk about Judy. In fact, we're not gonna talk about Judy at all.
Before he disappeared, Major Briggs shared with me and Cooper his discovery,
Who is Judy?
an extreme negative force called in olden times Jiao Day.
Why don't you ask Judy yourself?
Major Briggs, Cooper, and I put together a plan that could lead us to Judy.
Who is Judy?
You've already met Judy.
Now, the last thing Cooper told me, if I disappear like the others, do everything you can to find me. I'm trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
I'm not gonna talk about Judy. In fact, we're not gonna talk about Judy at all.
No, let's talk about Judy. When did Cooper, Briggs, and Cole first discuss Jiao Day? That's not entirely clear, but it seems reasonable to assume that that probably happened before Cooper entered the Black Lodge. Who is Judy? I definitely believe that Judy is the entity that coughed up Bob and a bunch of evil eggs. But I also believe that Judy is also represented by Laura's doppelganger. The evidence that Judy is somehow connected with Sarah Palmer is compelling and overwhelming. But there is also compelling evidence that the inner darkness haunting Sarah, that's Laura's doppelganger, as suggested visually when we see Laura's tainted finger, where she wore the ring in Fire Walk with Me, and we then see Laura's big smile surrounded by darkness. And if Laura Palmer is the representation of light and goodness and love, then surely her shadow self would represent darkness and evil and rage. So it's a trap set for Judy, and Laura Palmer is being used as the bait. You tell me which makes more sense to you. Cold, calculating Mr. C being willing to sacrifice Laura, or White Knight Agent Cooper himself? This all boils down to the basic core struggle we saw all season. The childlike innocence of Dougie Coop versus the cold and calculating measures of Mr. C. And to play on an observation I made in my previous Twin Peaks video, what better represents this conflict between childlike innocence and cold and calculating demeanor more so than coffee? Please observe.
Agent Cooper loves coffee.
Black as midnight on a moonless night.
Pretty black.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee. Damn good coffee. And hot.
Dougie!
Hi! I've had, I can't tell you how many cups of coffee in my life, and this is one of the best.
Would you like a cup of coffee?
No, thanks. I'm all right.
Where are you?
We're just entering Twin Peaks city limits. Is the coffee on?
Coffee?
Notice how the good side of Cooper loves coffee almost to the point of absurdity. There are countless examples of this, both with classic pre-split Coop and also with Dougie Coop and the awakened Good Dale. But after the two Coops reunited as one, this version of Cooper orders a coffee, so the good side of Coop is definitely in there somewhere, but he doesn't seem all that excited about the coffee. He's certainly not overjoyed. This means that there's an inner struggle going on, and I believe this indicates that Mr. C has the edge. Let's remember, Mr. C was the one who seemingly called the shots during his partnership with Bob. So Mr. C has the experience points here. And we know Cooper's good side didn't always win out, as evidenced by the incident from the original run with Bernard Renault. I believe Mr. C is the one again calling the shots here. And all this goes back to why would Cooper want to go change the past in the first place? The evidence strongly supports the idea that Mr. C was indeed victorious in the end. Mr. C was the one who was always willing to sacrifice anyone and anything necessary to achieve his objectives. There were countless examples of this throughout the return. So I think Mr. C did what he sought to do. Arrived at the coordinates and united with Judy, although I don't think it went down anything like what he expected. But if that wasn't Mr. C, and that was our beloved Agent Cooper, then his darker shadow self had won the battle in any case. Because our White Knight would never deliberately put a lady in distress in harm's way as a sacrifice. Would he? Without even giving her a choice? Mr. C was the one with the power of coercion and persuasion. He gets people to do what he wants. Beulah and Otis, Ray and Daria, Duncan Todd, Warden Murphy, Jack the Car Dude, and I believe in all likelihood probably Hutch and Chantel too. Indeed, even the evil entity Bob himself seemed to be under the spell of Mr. C, because there's ample evidence that Mr. C was the one steering that ship. Bob was clearly in charge with Leland, where everything revolved around chaos and short-term gratification. But with Mr. C, it's all cold and calculating, planning ahead, meaning that even Bob was serving the will of Mr. C. I think Mr. C conned Carrie Page the same way he conned all the others. Cooper never gave her a choice. He just persuaded her to tag along. Mr. C was the one sacrificing anyone in his way if it helped his objective. Daria, Jack, Duncan Todd, poor Mr. Strawberry, Hutch and Chantel, even his own son Richard, who was sacrificed in the most cowardly way imaginable. It was the Mr. C persona, the dark side of Cooper, who was always willing to actively sacrifice anyone and anything that got in his way. That's the complete opposite of our beloved White Knight Special Agent. With our hero, FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, really sacrifice Laura Palmer of all people, someone who had already suffered and endured so much? I think not. Although it's curious to remember that in Fire Walk With Me, it was Agent Cooper who was trying to urge Laura from afar not to take the ring. So there is an existing precedent here with Cooper trying to intervene in Laura's past. And interestingly enough, this entire dilemma of sacrificing one for the benefit of the greater good, this is the exact same type of dilemma faced by Harry Truman. No, not our favorite town sheriff, no offense, Frank, but President Truman, back when the decision was made to test and use the bomb, an historical event that represents a starting point for the Twin Peaks universe. And maybe that's the greater message here, that all heroes are inherently flawed, and that they are sometimes faced with making impossibly difficult decisions when an unfavorable circumstance dictates. But any way you slice it, if the good Dale was willing to sacrifice Laura Palmer for the greater good, then maybe Cooper wasn't truly the heroic figure we always assumed him to be. Either way, I think the final showdown reveals that Cooper's dark side emerged victorious, and that neither Cooper nor Laura faced their shadow selves with imperfect courage. Cooper lost, because I refuse to believe that Dale Cooper, who was the personification of childlike innocence when he was stuck in his Dougie Jones state of being, the one who shared chips with Sonny Jim, the one who could detect liars doing wrong with his incredible intuition, the one who eagerly put himself in harm's way in order to protect Janie E., and the one who can merrily enjoy the simpler things in life, like a damn fine cup of coffee or a tasty slice of cherry pie. I refuse to believe that that version of Cooper would ever willingly sacrifice anyone, let alone a tragic figure like Laura Palmer, even if it were for the greater good. No way. Ergo, I believe the available evidence strongly suggests the compelling possibility of a complete and total victory for Mr. C. And on a closing note, I think this is part of the reason Lynch gave us 2 clues that left the door open for more Twin Peaks ahead.
And these pages are for sure from Laura's diary.
Yeah, these are from her diary, the diary found at her friend Harold Smith's.
Say hello to Gordon if you see him. He'll remember the unofficial version.
These are 3 of the 4 pages that we saw were torn out, missing.
He'll remember the unofficial version.
And there's still one missing.
He'll remember the unofficial version.
If Cole will remember the unofficial version, then there must be a reason he might need to remember. And if 3 missing pages brought Twin Peaks back after 25 years, then that one last missing page could bring it back again. I don't need any more Twin Peaks. I don't need anything. I want more Twin Peaks. Indeed, I'm just itching for more. So itchy. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. May your night be both wonderful and strange.
This is what I want. What year is this?